Great, thank you. So, June meeting of the New State Cemetery Board. I'm Mark Patterson, chair of the board, and we have a new board member today. Jill, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jill Faber. I am with the New York State Attorney General's office. I'm head of the Poughkeepsie Regional Office, and this is my first meeting on the committee, and I look forward to working with you all.
Great, great. And
Paul Ambrose, representing Commissioner Howard Zucker of the Department of Health.
go ahead.
Louis Polishuk, Director, Division of Cemeteries.
Chester Butkowitz, Assistant Director, Division of Cemeteries.
Mike Seelman, Senior Investigator, Division of Cemeteries.
Glenn Green, Investigator, Division of Cemeteries.
Brendan Stanton, Investigator, Division of Cemeteries.
Alicia Young, Accountant, Division of Cemeteries.
Tony Melillo, Counsel to the Cemetery Board.
Okay. All right, so first order of business is to review the minutes. Take a look at those.
There's no way we're going to get through 2 months without Paul having corrections. Good. I feel better.
So I actually have it too. Go ahead. Oh, okay. I was late at the meeting at the Desmond, so I didn't present the legislation report. So it shouldn't be Mr. Melillo reported. Somebody, I think, reported.
I was trying to cover for you.
Thank you, buddy. You're a good man.
I think I did it.
Okay.
So the minutes should reflect that the legislation report was given by Director Polishuk.
And I actually have a correction. On page 2, Oakwood Cemeteries in Westchester County, not Monroe.
That's a substitute.
I mean, the number, we have a numbering system that clearly identifies it as being Westchester County, so it doesn't make that much difference, but might as well fix it.
They won't have to relocate.
Yeah, right.
That'd be interesting. Given their history with the town, they might want to, or the village, I forget which one, they might want to relocate.
I'm sure it's not worth it. All right, so do we have any other corrections to the minutes? If you have unsubstantial ones, you'll just one. All right, so we're going to have a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
Move to approve the minutes as corrected.
Okay. Great.
Is there a second?
Second, sorry, I'm sorry, already. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. A report from our council, Tony, on legislation and regulations.
Yep. There hasn't been a whole lot of movement. Some bills have moved to third reading in the Senate, but no action in the Assembly. There is one bill, let me see if I can find it, that actually passed the Senate. It is coming up. I shouldn't have done it this way. Hold on. It's coming.
I'm getting busy watching
Passed
from here.
Senate. Here we go. It's the bill dealing with establishing a state veteran cemetery program. It's number 6 on the list, Senate 3906. It passed the Senate and delivered to the Assembly. It also passed the Senate in 17, delivered to the Assembly and died there. So, and it's showing no action in the Assembly. So that's the only movement we're seeing.
No other legislation we need to be aware of. All right, and in terms of rules and regulations, no rules and
Nothing happening right now.
Okay. Thank you. Louis, your director's report?
Yeah, a couple things. Let's see what's on the agenda, so I actually say what I'm supposed to say. Number one, so we annually, all the divisions of the Department of State have to prepare a strategic operating plan and present it. So we have ours. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of what we're up to. The nice thing is we have actually completed significant elements of what was in our last year's strategic operating plan, which was modernizing our data management by getting off of the mainframe and using a combination of Access and SharePoint to track all of our data, and implementing online filing of cemetery annual reports. Those were 2 big goals we had, and we got them done. A third goal that we finished not in the past, finished just after the past fiscal year, was updating our auditor's manual. We're about 2/3 of the way through updating our investigator's manual, and then we are going to be updating manuals that are more for the public, the treasurer's manual, and we're going to have a, I don't know, superintendent, cemetery operators manual, one that deals with the operational aspects as opposed to the financial aspects. Those were a couple of things that, the internal stuff was something that was part of the comptroller's recommendation on their audit of us, that we update our manuals, and we're doing that. So for next year, the big initiatives are really to continue, get all that done, get all the data type stuff done, continue to work through with cemeteries and towns to try to reduce the number of abandonments. Related to that, there seems to be a bit of a push out west for consolidations of cemeteries, which we're obviously going to work with to make sure that, A, if anyone's considering one of these deals, it's actually beneficial to both the cemeteries, but B, that if there's anything we can do when that is beneficial to both cemeteries to try to facilitate that happening. Longer-term strategic goals are to try to address more broadly the issue of abandonment, and also the database. This is getting a little in the weeds, but the database we're primarily moving our stuff to Access databases. Right now, Access isn't something you can pull up through the cloud, like you can do with a lot of other Microsoft stuff. In an ideal world, all of our data would be available on the cloud. All of our investigators would have tablets, and they would be able to do inspections and audits right there in the field, inputting the data directly into our system and be able to call up everything. We're not there yet, partly because you simply can't. The older versions of SharePoint, which is on the cloud, allowed you to pull stuff out of Access. The newer versions don't seem to do that, but we did not sort of stop what we were doing to rejigger that because we thought it was really critical to get off of a technology that was from the late 80s and was no longer supported, or is soon to be no longer supported. But that's sort of a longer-term wish list kind of project. We're also going to be working with various people to try to, we're a little later in the season this year, I think it's deliberate, but we're going to be doing public information sessions in different regions of the state for cemeteries and localities. That's again part of our strategic initiative. That was number one thing. Number two thing, I just did it, the audit follow-up. That's what we're doing. Number three thing is your predecessor liked to ask questions about executive compensation. So we're trying to develop a way of reporting that to the board and try to gather that information as often whenever we look at cemeteries, so we can try to build a database, or I don't know about database, but build a capacity to assess and compare top-level compensation at cemeteries. And there's a few caveats here. Having people paid a lot of money at a cemetery that's making 9 figures annually in fund, that's actually earning 9 figures or 8 figures or whatever annually, is different from a cemetery that's barely breaking even. So we're going to try to keep track of expenses to show compensation as a fraction of expenses, and we'll also show profit and loss on the statements. Second, one thing which the good folks at NISAC pointed out to us is that with some of these cemeteries, while it is true that their board members are paid something for attending, it is also true that their board members are expected to and do in fact contribute substantial sums to the cemetery. A 990 does not capture those contributions. So it's something we're going to have to ask about if the board is in fact also is being paid but is also a quote-unquote giving board. It's worth knowing that some of that money is going back to the cemetery, or if it's going to a friends of, to figure out what it's going to a friends of. That's all I had on that one. The last thing is...
Well, just stop there.
Yeah.
I mean, the issue of executive compensation is, I think, a shared board agenda, not just that the General's office was raising it. And then Lewis, a month or so ago, put out a spreadsheet with certain parameters, but that's really up for grabs. I mean, I think that's the starting place is for us to think about what are the right things to look at. You know, is it compared to profit and loss? Is it compared to, you know, what? I mean, again, it doesn't fit neatly. There's no statutory basis for this, so it's really a matter of us developing our policy or judgments around that, or a lens to look through. So really, take a look at that form, chat with Louis about ideas you have, and we'll try to develop the best kind of filter that we can so we can have intelligent conversation.
To clarify, we are really only in the information gathering stage at this
Yes,
point.
right, exactly.
Is it contemplated that once the relevant information is gathered, that we will somehow use that in some sort of regulatory fashion with individual cemeteries or best practices or state, or
I think it's more
that's
about
unclear at this point?
giving the board, you know, a consistent way to look at it, and then make individual decisions. So it's more of a broad policy, might not be policy, but broad practice, and then we'll see. I mean, that's we'll see. You know.
The other thing that I forgot what I was going to say, so that's okay. We'll just move on.
the other thing.
But there is one other thing I wanted to report on, which is so Frederick Douglass Memorial Park, as you guys all know, has been in receivership for a very long time. We, the Attorney General went to court, getting an order back in December, I believe, replacing the receiver with a new person, someone who is local to Staten Island, who sort of has experience working hands-on with smaller, struggling cemeteries. Her term as receiver was to be no more than 18 months. The idea being that they could finally transition to having a board after some degree of turning around was applied to them. So since the receiver started, the cemeteries had several volunteer groups come in. They've got a lot of plantings that have been done around the cemetery. They've renovated the office. They've computerized most, if not all, of their burial records, and are working with a foundation to try to get some newer, old equipment that would be more suitable to their needs. The receiver also replaced the gate, the pillars of which were crumbling and the gate piece of which was not fully operational, with another gate, which apparently caused one of the lot owners, or we believe she is a lot owner, to have her nose out of joint, who proceeded to bring a lawsuit seeking to enjoin the cemetery from taking down the gates after the gates had been removed, seeking to prevent them from having a fundraiser that's scheduled for about 10 days from now, and seeking to prevent them from removing anything from the cemetery, and not as part of her preliminary injunction, but after as the ultimate result of the lawsuit, having the receiver replaced with this particular lot owner. The matter went to, first it was filed in Staten Island. The judge in Staten Island took one look at it, said, wait a minute, there's a case pending in New York. Get out of here. It was refiled in New York County. The Attorney General's office went to court on Friday, and the request for interim relief for enjoining the fundraiser, et cetera, was denied in its entirety. They're supposed to come back to court on June 28th, and the judge suggested to the plaintiff that she work with the receiver to help address the issues at the cemetery rather than suing the cemetery. So obviously we'll keep you posted.
A question about the
Yeah.
fixing the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Did that avoid being a major renovation?
I didn't
Just
think it was a major
just a
renovation.
repair?
I don't think it rose to
Okay.
the level of a major renovation. It cost, does not require any permits. They weren't changing any grading or drainage.
Okay.
It ended up costing them $7,000. Seemed pretty clear that it wasn't a major renovation. But that is what's going on there.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Any questions or comments about the director's report?
By the way, neither you nor we are a party to that lawsuit. The Attorney General is named as a quote-unquote nominal defendant, whatever that means.
It's right on the basis for dismissal.
Except that the AG needs to be involved because the AG was the one who got the order appointing the receiver, and the
No, but I
board
mean
seeks to
that-
change receiver.
Uh,
Oh, you mean failing to name us?
Yes.
You're probably right about that. Of course, to have dismissal, you would actually have to have a complaint filed, and there's no complaint yet. Which so far is another basis for dismissal.
And my understanding is that the plaintiff has a group, right, called Friends of Frederick Douglass. She's suing on behalf of.
Well, it's unclear.
Okay.
She does appear to have a Friends of group. And they do appear to be in the caption. Who actually is the plaintiff? And what theory they have for bringing a lawsuit is more than a little bit unclear, since nobody's actually, as far as I know, even written, let alone served a complaint.
So it was just the request for the temporary relief.
Yes.
Sometimes we have seen cemeteries that have friends of cemetery, but they have different objectives and goals, so it's a little less friendly.
This is also a Friends of group that, as far as I know, has never actually, the purpose of a Friends of group primarily is to raise money for the cemetery. This, as far as I know, is a Friends of group that, to the best of my knowledge, has never raised any money.
Okay. Okay.
That's what I got.
So next on the agenda is the vandalism report. Chester?
Do you want to do the overview?
And we did send out an overview of the vandalism fund, and so at some point we can have any questions about that. Chester, you want to?
Yeah, for this fiscal year ending March 31st, 2019, vandalism fees collected so far were $58,220. Applications granted totaled $282,131, and applications pending are $2,211,685. Of that, 10 applications are before the board today. Of the applications granted so far, 9 were for restoration, totaling $263,882, and 1 was for abandonment, totaling $18,249.
And to clarify, today we have, of the applications we have today, all but 1 are characterized as being for dangerous monuments. But the final one, which is an abandonment application, we've limited it just to the dangerous monument aspect of the application. That doesn't mean that there won't be another, that we will not at some other point put before you their request to have funds for equipment that they already purchased, and for repairing and repaving roads in the cemetery. That's just, we're not ready to present that yet. The only thing I'll add to that is that we are getting close to our annual appropriation on the vandalism fund already, and we've been working with the department to come up with ways to address that issue.
Is this an unusual amount at this point in the fiscal year? Yeah.
The shorter answer is yes, and the slightly longer answer is that there are 2 very large abandonment applications before the board. One from the town of New Windsor for, one's before the board, the other isn't yet.
Yeah.
One's from the town of New Windsor for the abandonment of Newburgh Woodlawn Cemetery. The other is from the town of Oswegatchie for the abandonment of Foxwoods Memorial Park. That's what it's called, right? But it's not a memorial park, it's a mausoleum.
Well, I think they're now referring to it as a memorial park.
Okay,
It was
well-
Foxwood Mausoleum.
Right, so it's those 2 combined account for $1.4 million of the,
Of the 2 points.
well, it's 2.5 because $300,000 of Newburgh Windsor is before the board today.
And just, so you know, it's paid through an appropriation, and it's usually tracked what's happened in the past, in the immediate past. So the number that got approved this year was based on what's happened, and we've seen an unexpected increase.
I mean, we also have had one more extraordinary abandonment, Whispering Maples Memorial Gardens, which is 2 mausoleums in 2 different towns, a crematory, and in one of the towns, a small section for outdoor burials. That one, the state senator was able to obtain funding in the budget, for separate, additional funding, I should say. It wasn't separate, it was additional funding in the budget to cover most, but not all, of the cost of that project. It was still approved through the board, but it had its own source of funding, which is why we were able to cover that.
Yeah, right. So this is, if you just look at the math, it's an issue of some concern. We have reinstituted, actually last year, we instituted a policy of only paying 25% upfront and then paying the vouchers as approved. That continues. So we will at the end of this meeting have authorized authorized payments of close to our total appropriation, but the expenditures don't come. We'll have to see how this, but we're looking at that. We also have expenditures probably from last year falling into this fund in terms of cash. So we're trying to take a closer look. We are trying to figure out ways that we might be able to prioritize applications. Obviously, it's all important, and that doesn't mean that we would necessarily not approve all of the things, but we might not approve them all right away, try to figure out the cash flow. So again, we're taking a deeper look. We're trying to figure out ways that make sense, and we'll report back to the
Our priority for this particular meeting is dangerous monuments.
Right. Always, any health and safety issues, not all of which might be dangerous monuments, some might be, roofs caving in or something. But we're trying to take a little bit closer look at it so we can figure out the cash flow.
And just to clarify, the 25% is not, it has a positive effect on our cash flow, but that was not implemented as a cash flow device. It was implemented because we and our department as a whole have a concern with paying everything up front. There's no incentive for the work to get done properly. The cemeteries are supposed to withhold half of the funds until the work is completed and we sign off that it's been completed properly, but there have been times where they didn't do that. So by not paying the money up front, we can ensure that no final payment will be made to the contractor until we check on the work.
So at those intervals before the next payment is made, there's some sort of certification done, or?
We go out there and inspect it, and there's no formal certification per se, but somebody will inspect it and write something in the file saying, yeah, we've looked at this and it looks good.
Well, it's what we're saying is, what do we do when we receive an application? There's processes.
Mike, you want to?
Start to finish when we receive an application?
Sure.
So we'll receive an application, which will, just a one-page form, the amount of money they're requesting. There'll be estimates. We verify that the estimates are looking at the same procedures for repair. We look at the legal notice, make sure they made the legal notice and they used the proper wording in the legal notice. And that's done really for two reasons: to get descendants of the lot owners to either come forward and repair it on their own, which does happen sometimes, but also to notify them that there's a possibility that if the monument can't be repaired, it'll be removed and replaced with a flush marker. Then we would call the cemetery, whoever signed the application, and we'd make an appointment with them. We'd go out, we'd meet them, look at the monuments in question, determine if in fact they are hazardous, which is, I've got one in here where there were 3 monuments that they had requested as hazardous. 2 of them had fallen over the winter and they were no longer hazardous. And one of them was perfectly straight. There was nothing hazardous. We couldn't figure out why was that considered hazardous. And so the 3 of us.
They can also be too small or too light to be hazardous.
So we agreed that they were no longer hazardous. They were removed and the estimates were adjusted. Then the investigator will write up a report indicating what we found with a recommendation at the end. We also look, you can see in the reports, if they received a grant last year or the year before, that work was done, we had followed up on it, the contractor was paid. The application then comes to the board would approve it. voucher goes to fiscal. Fiscal sends out the money. In the past, they would send out all the money, and we would explain to the cemetery, we'd write a letter basically saying you were approved for X amount, which is, break it down, $10,000 to the low bidder for repair of 12 monuments, $200 for repayment of your legal notice. When the work has been completed, notify us and we'll come out. So then the cemetery would get their check, they'd call their contractor, they'd have the work prepared, they'd call us, we'd come out and meet them again, and we would all agree the work was done properly, or we would say, the work is not done properly, these are still hazardous, or whatever we find. And then when the work is corrected, we'd send them a letter saying you're free to go ahead and pay the final. And then they're supposed to send us proof of repair. Well, we've already been out there and we've seen that the repair has been made, but what we want is a paid invoice, canceled check, something like that. And then we're done.
And just one point, we approve the amount of the lowest bid. If they want to pay a higher bidder for some particular better warranty or something, they could do that, just we wouldn't reimburse them for.
There have been times where we have approved a sum greater than the lowest bid,
Yeah.
usually because there's a better
Better
warranty.
warranty or something, right?
But
But
generally-
oftentimes, they get reimbursed that amount if they want to go higher.
Right.
And we do also some financial looking at the same time, at least do we,
Not for vandalism,
not for vandalism? Okay.
We check to make sure that they're up to date in their annual reports and their vandalism payments.
Right.
And then regionally, I mean, I may ask the investigator or the accountant in our office, hey, I've got this before me, is there anything I should know? Is the treasurer dodging you? And we can use this as an opportunity to, follow through on that.
Okay. So, are there any issues of the, in terms of the orders? Do you want to sort of go through them, or are you going to take them all? Have they been reviewed, and do you have any questions about them?
Use some kind of a material that expands when injected under the monument to level it. And I wondered, there was a lower bid than the one that the cemetery wanted to actually have approved. Wonder if there's any discussion to have about that. Is that a legitimate technology? Is it something that should be looked at more broadly across other applications for potential use? If it's much less expensive and just as effective, is it something that should be considered for a broader application?
Yes. Cato had done a previous application where they had monuments repaired. And so if you look at the report, it talks about traditional repair versus non-traditional repair. And that's the term that I use because what we have seen for repair is to disassemble the monument, dig the foundation out. Many times there's either no foundation or it's like field stone, like thrown in a hole as a base. They would remove that, go down below the frost line, put in a form, and then pour a concrete foundation. And the board in the past has kind of determined that's probably the best way to repair these, to basically start from scratch. When, after Cato had their original application and had the work done, they were very happy with the work. They applied for this one. And at that time, there was some suggestion made about using this. The company, Woodford Brothers, offered to repair two monuments as an example or experiment, just to see how they were, and they did that. It's a little different in that they're not replacing what was there. They're not removing what was there. They're just kind of jacking it up.
Right.
My understanding is this technology is used for, like, if you have a sidewalk that's tilted, and you want to adjust the drainage and, I suppose possibly a building, I'm not sure. So they did. They came in, they repaired two. They kind of dug down, they injected this stuff under the monument. The only real downside that was represented was that the foam, that they actually, it's like an expanding foam, can't be subjected to sunlight. which is fine. So I went out after the work had been done, and I looked at the two monuments. One of them was a medium-sized monument, actually clearly hazardous, but not 9 feet tall. I think it was 3 feet tall, and that looked great. It was level, and it was solid, and it appeared to be a very good fix.
And do they reseal? They still reseal around?
At that time, they hadn't. But they've indicated that they will. The other monument was a larger obelisk with several jointed pieces, and although it was straight, there was still movement. You could pretty lightly push it, and there would, with all those pieces, there was movement, and it didn't seem to me like the foundation. It wasn't like a 4 foot by 4 foot chunk of concrete holding it there. So there was movement, and it kind of wiggled.
Was the foundation? That's the
It's kind of
obelisk
hard
was
to tell
on,
because that's below the sod,
but the obelisk sitting on that initial,
the base.
was the base.
It's kind of hard to tell when you're doing that, but there was movement. So I brought that to the attention of the cemetery, who brought it to the attention of the contractor. Contractor came back with a much more detailed list of what it is that they're doing. And I let them know that they needed to seal the joints. It's very important to keep the water out when you have multiple pieces. And also, it adheres them together. Not only does it keep the water out, it makes them solid. And I think, the mostly what we've seen with the hazardous monuments, when someone's hurt, is they're pushing in the monument. Generally, they're not walking by and a monument falls on them. People shouldn't be pushing on monuments. But there's kind of a level of, can a toddler climb up a monument and try to help themselves up and have it topple on them? That's real precarious.
Right.
And when you have that movement, it's more likely to come over. So the contractor indicated that they would, in the future, anything that they would include would be sealed appropriately, so you wouldn't have that movement. One of the issues was we didn't have another bid for this, so you really couldn't compare. The two higher bids, I think, were $30,000 and $40,000 roughly. You can clearly tell that one of them is 25% higher than the other for the same work. Removing, replacing, and sealing. This at
20,000-ish.
Yeah, 20,300. If we had another estimate, it would be much clearer if it was an appropriate estimate to be able to compare to. But the big issue is before this came to the board, I talked to the treasurer, who indicated that they had a meeting, and even though they submitted that bid, they felt that they were experimenting with something, and they were very happy with the work that they had done originally, and they didn't necessarily want to be testing this new procedure. So
So it's not a time-tested technology at this
Well,
point
they've
for
done-
this application?
they did the two in the fall. Since then, I found out there's another contractor that offers this in Broome County, so that if someone wants to do this in the future, they can bid it, and get two bids. So we have competitive bids for the same process. And it's been 6 months. Usually we want the 10-year warranty. Another issue with that, they had a very detailed warranty, and I think it was a 1/4 inch per foot is what they considered. If it's worse than a 1/4 inch off per foot, that's when that would trigger their warranty, and they'd come in and do those repairs. So if it's a 1/4 inch for a foot, it's a 1/2 inch for 2 feet. So if you have a 4-foot foundation that's an inch off, that's something. If it's a 10-foot tall monument that the base is an inch off, that's pretty extreme. I didn't have any contact with them to find out if they could adjust that warranty based on my conversation with the treasurer of the board, who indicated that that's not something they wanted to do at this time. However, the information's there.
So I guess my follow-up question is, would it be appropriate to have a presentation by someone that provides this type of technology to the board so that we can, when we get these things to consider, these applications that include the use of that technology as opposed to, or in competition with, the removal and new foundation work? We know what we're dealing with? I mean, is it too new? And I probably shouldn't have used the word poly-level because that may be a brand name. I don't, a trademark name. It's the foam injection process. Is that what it is? If in the generic?
I think that the contractor would be very happy to come and make a presentation. I know there was an article in the
Broadcaster. Yeah.
Have you inspected any of those installations that have used that process, that, you know, spoken to the folks at a cemetery where that's been done, where
I don't believe it's been done at a cemetery.
it hasn't? Okay.
At least not here.
Not
Not
in
here.
our jurisdiction.
But like you said, it's significantly less. One of the things, originally, when this application started, a lot of the contractors would cap foundations. So instead of removing the foundation, they would, so if you have a concrete foundation and you have a square base of a monument, and what happens, I'll draw you a picture. The concrete can deteriorate over time. So you have, so I'm drawing, this is the ground, this is the foundation that's underground, and this is where the edges have become eroded and through the freeze-thaw cycle. And then here's the base of the monument. So you would have a situation where you have a rounded foundation, you have a square base, and that's unstable. So what the contractors would do, rather than remove this foundation that's straight and level and solid, however, it's eroded, they'd remove the monument, they'd drill holes into the foundation, put some steel pins in there, put a form around it, and then just cap it. So they would then have
Square edge.
a squared edge with pins, and it's probably going to be good for another 100 years. And the idea is that foundation's been in the ground 100 years, it hasn't moved. Why would we disturb that? We're just going to correct the issue. And that was sometimes half of the price, certainly less invasive. You're not digging in the cemetery, things like that. And you already know that's the foundation. So when we would look at those things, we would say, okay, one bid is for replacement and one bid is for capping. Capping should be cheaper. And so we would say, if the cemetery wishes to do this capping fix, they should provide another estimate for the capping fix, apples to apples. And so generally, when we have a contractor who's prefers to do that type of fix, and that's not in every situation. Sometimes the foundations are tipping. If the foundation's already tipping, and let's say it's off a couple degrees, and you cap that, it's already tipping. It's going to continue tipping. Even though the monument's straight now, it's going to continue. So my suggestion would be that this foam procedure is similar to capping, because you're not necessarily going down 48 inches. You're not removing and replacing. You're just kind of repositioning what's there. I think it's certainly reasonable that it would be a good fix, and that the board has allowed the capping in the past. But I do think that you should have two estimates, so you know what you're dealing with.
I'm just talking out loud, I'm a little nervous about when there's such a small universe of potential contractors to have somebody come in and talk about that. I don't know if they can talk about it generically enough. Do you think there's another way we could get an update on the process?
Is there an engineering group
Yeah,
that
I don't know.
could talk about it in the generic sense?
Well, let's take that.
We can reach out to the Monument Dealers Association.
Yeah, there might be some way to get a more generic conversation about this that would
Really the
inform the board.
facts. That all.
I guess the point is, if it's just as effective and a lot less expensive,
Yeah. We could-
it's worthy of consideration.
Sure.
And I don't know how to compare that to the
Yeah, but
the current
I agree,
technology.
because what you're doing when you're seeing those two estimates is you're comparing apples to oranges. And to approve the $20,000, you're really approving it without another bid for a contractor who's willing to do that type of technology.
In addition to being cheaper, one of the big things that was pushed, and it's true, is it's less invasive. You're digging down close to the monument, repositioning the monument, and then injecting this foam, as opposed to bringing a mini excavator in, disassembling the monument, moving it around the area, digging around an area where there's old graves
Yeah.
and all that comes with that.
Yeah.
And then replacing it and fixing the ruts and, where they've driven over old graves where it's sunk and things like that. So it is less invasive, which I think is probably part of the reason that it's less expensive.
Are there enough companies doing this type of work to get multiple bids, though?
I only know of the two.
And they're in different areas, or they're?
One is in Onondaga County and one is in Broome County. I haven't spoken to either of the contractors directly.
Well, the truth is, in some areas, it's hard enough to get two bidders to bid on anything when it comes to monument restoration.
The technology is being used for other applications, though, for leveling sidewalks, as you said, and foundations or whatever. And it may exist, but not be, people haven't thought yet about this application
Right.
in other parts of the state.
People aren't really aware that monuments are straightened.
Interesting. I have another question about the depth of the foundations. Some bidders are coming in with a depth of 36 inches, some 42, some 48. Is deeper better, or is 36 just as good as 48? Is it dependent on the geography? It's difficult to compare when somebody's saying we're going to dig it down to 36 versus somebody coming in and saying we're going to dig it down to 48 for the same amount of money
Yeah.
or a different amount of money.
It's
Hard to know.
I would assume it's going to cost more money to go deeper because you're going to use more labor and digging, but you're also going to use more material and making the foundation, so shallower should be less. We don't have a clear guideline as to what it should be, just like.
Do we have a minimum?
Yeah,
Below
I
the
think-
frost line, right?
Yeah, we generally say below the frost line.
Is that
In
36?
I think zone 5, which is a big part of the state, zone 5, I think is 48 inches. Generally, we defer to the cemetery has foundations as to what do they find acceptable. I prefer 42 inches. The big thing is that it has a 10-year warranty. The idea is if you go over 10 years, you're probably gonna get enough freeze and thaw. You're gonna get cold winters. You get cold winter without snow, and the frost will go deeper. Actually, a lot of times the frost will go right down through the granite monument. So even if you don't have a lot of snow, the frost will permeate through the stone. Our preference is at least 42 inches, but the big deal is the warranty.
Do you look at, do cemeteries generally have rules about how deep a foundation must go on monuments?
No.
Yeah, not generally.
No.
When the cemetery, and most of these, or all of these, the cemetery has not installed the foundations. Because they were back before cemeteries did that. When the cemetery has an approved charge for foundations, they submit it to us and we approve the service charge. And when the letter goes back out to the cemetery approving their charge, it is stated that that approval is for a foundation that's supported to the full depth of the grave. We don't really have a way of checking that, but what we do is if the cemetery comes forward and we know that in 1982, the cemetery was approved for 25 cents per inch, and they come in with an application for one of those stones that's in that time period, we will ask, do you install foundations? Did you install this foundation? If you installed this foundation, was it to the full depth of the grave? If not, very rarely have we come into this, but this is the theory. The vandalism fund's not gonna pay for that. You were approved for that amount, to charge that amount to dig that foundation to that depth. Had that foundation been dug 5 feet deep, there's a pretty good chance it wouldn't have.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question.
I guess one of the questions that I have is, does it Should there be a standard? Should there be a minimum? Should we require that they all bid to a certain depth and then compare prices? I mean, obviously, it would be more expensive to dig a 48, so we're trying to compare that to a less expensive 36-inch. You know, it's hard to compare apples to oranges, as we said.
Well,
Is it worth the extra investment to go the extra depth?
The tension is that we have, in some areas, few enough bidders who want to get involved with us in the first place, and the more we require things, the fewer bids we're going to get. On this particular issue, I would look at whether repairs are holding up. If they appear to be holding up, and we have dangerous monuments, the dangerous monument piece of the vandalism bill goes back to 2000. So if we have ones that are holding up since 2000, well, that's a pretty good indication that they're going to hold up for as long as they would have had this been the initial.
So do we go through and look at each grave to see whether or not it has been repaired in the last 10, 15, 20 years within the warranty period?
We haven't done that yet.
Well, if we were to get one, if a cemetery is coming in for a new set of vandalism fund applications, we are going to look at the old application.
And has there always been a variation in the bids in terms of sometimes it's 36, sometimes it's 48? I mean, it's not that this is like a trend that the bids are for shallower foundations.
No.
So,
No.
okay,
No. And we really try to get uniform bids.
yeah.
And just to clarify, so if somebody had work done last year, the year before, we would go out and look to make sure that work was done to the best of our ability. If part of the reason we're doing the 25% is you have a lot of different levels of cemetery operators. Sometimes they're in the cemetery looking over the contractor's shoulder with a ruler and their cell phone taking pictures. Sometimes they're not even there and they just write the check. So we make sure that the work was complete, but we don't always go back to look to see how it's held up. And I think that's what your question was, how is it held up after 10 years? But that's certainly something we can do, because we have a lot of the cemeteries that are coming forward have had work done in the last 10 years.
But if
like
it were
we
the
just said,
same
if-
monument,
No, we would,
Yeah, you would look if you were
Right.
talking about repairing, vandalism requests for the same monuments that had been done 15 years
but
earlier.
it wouldn't hurt when we were in a cemetery to spot check the ones that were
no,
repaired 5 years ago.
it's a good idea.
But I think also, just almost on maybe the other side of the ledger is that it's not our money, it's either fund, people who paid in or appropriation taxpayer dollars that have done it. So we want to make sure we have efficient, cost-effective solutions, whether it's digging deeper or using the newer technology. So we certainly should be thinking about those things. I think we always have to balance the fact, though, that we've got a pretty wide range of cemeteries, and some are just say, very low-tech operations and have a hard time getting the application in.
And a wide range of contractors.
And a wide range of contractors. So, but I think those are good questions. I think we can look at the issue of standardization around what we require somebody to bid or what we consider when they get bids in. I think that's a good question, both for efficiency and effectiveness.
And particularly, I've just thought of this, if there aren't too many contractors who are bidding on this, then you start to wonder, and I have obviously no reason to think this, but then you start to wonder, what's the real cost and what are they just willing to do it for?
Sure. Well,
I don't know that you guys have ever done this, but if this expanding foam process is something we want cemeteries to consider, could we divide up, let them use that process for smaller 3, 4, 5 foot, and use the other bid, the traditional contractor for the taller ones?
Because we've
I don't
looked
see
at
why
that
not.
before with capping, like,
Yeah.
this is just different types of monuments.
Right.
Some, it seems more appropriate to repair it one way, and others may not be appropriate. And I think that, based on what I saw with the work that was done already, very definitely a medium-sized monument, I think that'd probably be Good. Yeah. I would like to let it get through a couple freeze thaws to see how, how it reacts.
Right.
Does the frost grab a hold of the foam and bring it up, and you have a worse problem? I don't know. But
I noticed in a lot of these applications, it seems to be that there are declinations to the invitations to apply for bids from some of these repair organizations, and that seems to be getting more frequent in my term here. And I'm wondering what the cause of that is. And I'm looking at a lot of these applications, and they have to provide the price of flat marker replacements for every single grave that they're looking at. And in my term here, I've never seen a flat marker used. There's usually a justification included in the package that says that it's 1.5, 1.25 times more expensive than repairing the one that's there, or it's in a historic section of the cemetery and they don't want to destroy that historic nature of the cemetery, which makes perfect sense. But is it required that they actually get a bid for a flat marker on every single one, or could it be done on some type of case-by-case basis that you've looked at them and you say this might be eligible for a flat marker, and you don't have to go through this laborious process of pricing it out for every single one? The likelihood of it happening is so slim.
Right. It gives the option of repair or replace. Repair or removal. And that's the statute, talks about repair or removal.
And it's been pointed out that if it's going to be removed, there's a cost to disposal, and there's a logistical issues, where are they going to put it, and all of that that's been discussed here before. But it just seems that there's a lot of good reasons to not put a flat marker in.
I don't know. I guess I could talk to. So we don't require that comparison if the cemetery has said, for whatever specific reason, we do not wish to do that. We had one.
That's an upfront decision. That's an upfront conversation.
Yep. We
Okay.
had that discussion with them.
Okay.
I had one last year where they repaired 20 monuments. There was one monument, and it's natural material, marble or something, and it had a fracture to it. And the contractors looked at it and they said, I can't guarantee. I can straighten it, but I can't guarantee it's not going to break while I'm working on it, and then I can't guarantee it's not going to break after I'm done. So they agreed, and they couldn't find anyone from the family. They'd had the legal notice out, and they replaced it with a flush marker. The rest of them were repaired. And again, as you said, the cost was a little bit higher. They had the disposal. I don't think that, and I could talk to a contractor and find out, I don't think the act of putting together that bid with the cost for granite or a flush marker is really that much higher, because if you look at them, they come up with a price, and then they multiply that by the total amount. But we can check with that. One of the things we've done with the contractors declining work, so if they only come forward with one estimate, we represent that to the board. This is what they've done. This is what they've attempted to do to try to get other bids, and this is the results. Sometimes that'll be a legal notice in the paper soliciting bids. Sometimes that'll be letters or emails to the contractor that are unanswered, or a response from the contractor. We've put together a spreadsheet of contractors who've done work throughout the state and had the work approved that we haven't had issues with. So basically, anyone that's on here is probably on that list, and we'll provide that to the cemetery if they're having trouble getting people to bid. We have a contractor in Western, and part of the problem is you have contractors that are set up to do this. They have the equipment, they have the knowledge, and they're willing to do it. It's very labor intensive, very dirty work. And they've kind of got it really fine tuned. And you'll see that in the averages. You know, the contractors, some contractors are averaging $600 to $800 per monument, whether they're driving 100 miles to do it or whether they're driving 5 miles, and they're doing good work. And others are charging $11, $100 per monument on average. So it is different regionally, but some of these guys really have it dialed in, and they can bid it at $800, and they can get it. And so if another contractor does 2 or 3 estimates, and his numbers keep coming up to $1,000 a monument, he's going to stop submitting estimates. And that's when we run into, what have you done to come up with another estimate? Type of thing.
I'm concerned about this too, because it's required by the regulation. An application shall include the following: a copy of bid submitted by at least 2 contractors. And there are a number today that only have 1 bid. So at some point, we might reach the point where the exception overcomes the rule, and we're approving more with 1 bid than with that, and we're really defeating, we might have to reconsider our regulation if we get to that point. I think, in fairness to the work they're doing, I think we not only have to see what Mike said, that the cemeteries are making their best effort to comply with that requirement, but also that the spirit is met, which is that based on division's experience, the price being charged is consistent with other prices in that region for that work. That, I mean, you guys have a database of knowledge in your head and in your computers that about whether.
And we're doing that with the database on the average cost per monument.
So I think that ought to be part of the presentation when there is only 1 bid, is that
How does that stack
you've
up?
looked at the price, and the price looks fair and reasonable based on your experience, as well as the effort that the cemetery has made to get the other bid.
Is the solicitation of bid for flat roof also in reg?
The regulation requires that when it's removal, rather than repair, that it be replaced with a flush of bronze or granite marker. It doesn't really talk about bidding there. Although, well, I mean, actually it says it's cost of repair or removal.
But it doesn't
2 bids
say-
for either.
But it doesn't say that you have to cost out the difference between the 2.
It's whichever one you've determined is going to be how you proceed.
Yeah.
That's why you can have that discussion in advance and bypass it.
Mike, is the warranty deterring them from bidding?
I don't believe so. I mean, the one contractor, his response is always, well, you know, as long as I'm alive or my boys are alive, we'll fix it, type of thing. Well, that's great, but please put it in writing. So I can submit, and I think he usually has a 25-year warranty. So, but again, the one warranty, it was I think it was a 5-year warranty, and it excluded natural, and it included the word critters. And, critter damage was not included. So I think if they're doing the work and they're doing it to those specifications, the warranty shouldn't be an issue. If it goes through, and we've had this discussion before, trying to come up with what is a legitimate warranty. You know, 5 years, if it goes through 5 years, if it goes through 10 years, it's probably going to last. So I don't know that that's deterring. I think it's the price.
That just doesn't make, they don't make enough money doing it compared to other things they could be doing?
No, I think if you're in a geographic area of the state and you've bid 3 times and your numbers tell you for the profit you want to make and the material and your overhead and everything, that it's $1,100 a monument, and you know there's someone else in that area that keeps coming up with $800 a monument, you don't have an incentive to spend that time looking at each monument and meeting with the people and putting it together.
Well, I think these are great questions for us to think of, not in specific, but in the broader, longer-term sort of policy, and trying to balance out the issues of the diversity of our clientele. And but increasingly, you know, we're asking more of our cemeteries because, you know, that's the way the world has evolved, and, you know, we don't have a contract, we have a voucher system, and that works out, but, you know, sometimes we need to sort of act like it's a contract, so make sure that the fiscal officers are happy. So, and those are great questions. Do you want to take them all as a consent agenda, or do you want to do the first 9 and then keep, I'd kind of like to keep New Windsor separate, just have a brief conversation about New Windsor. Is that okay?
Sure. First line.
So, yeah.
You've got your motion. I said you've got your motion.
I'm asking.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was the motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the first 9 applications that are on the agenda, as listed on the agenda.
Through Warsaw.
And
Yep, everything by New Windsor.
Do they
everything.
need to be stated for the record?
Yeah, I'll do it, though. To approve Kilowog Cemetery, Ato Cemetery, Jordanville Cemetery, Hillside Cambria Cemetery, Maple Grove Cemetery in Onondaga County, Maple Grove Cemetery in Otsego County, Green Ridge Cemetery in Saratoga, Union Park Cemetery, Warsaw Cemetery.
That's it for now.
Did I skip one?
Nope.
Okay.
That's it for
So
now.
that's the 9 applications for available funds that are before us. Can I have a second on that motion?
Second motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
So we need actual orders on these because we have to present that to our fiscal people so they can get paid. So they're all the same, but for the numbers and the names of the cemeteries, and that's for y'all's signature. I don't know if we're gonna do it now or when we take our break.
Should we do
Whatever's
do
your
it at the
choice.
break?
Yeah. Okay, so the last one, the town of New Windsor is
moving on
abandonment
to.
application, New Windsor Cemetery. And the reason I wanted to have a brief separate conversation is just that we have changed their, or not approved all the things in their application. And again, I just want to make sure that we were clear that the reasons that, they had other things in there, another 200,000 roughly,
More, I think.
270,000.
okay? And those were for,
The repair of roads as well as some equipment purchased for use in the cemetery.
what you said, I think you already said they've already purchased.
Yeah, the equipment they already purchased, and I've asked Brendan to get some more clarity as to, I mean, normally, we would look at this and they would say, we want X, Y, and Z. We take a look at it and say, well, what about getting U, V, and W, because that'll do the same job for you for less money, or we think you really don't, or the other thing, which I'm not saying is necessarily at play here, is would you look, what equipment do you as a town have overall? Can you bring that to the cemetery to do the work that's needed? If you don't have work that you can if you have the equipment, but you can't reasonably bring it to the cemetery, okay, fine. But if you have it and you could bring it there, we're not buying you new stuff just because the possibility is there. And I wanted to get a little more clarity as to whether what they bought would be something we'd have approved of had we.
Don't we normally want to see it before we approve?
Normally we would. I don't think we would reject it simply because they didn't come to us, but we do want to look at what they bought and make sure that it's really necessary for maintenance and that they consider that there wasn't some cheaper alternative that would do the same job and that they don't have. I think we're satisfied that they don't have similar equipment elsewhere in the
Yeah,
town that
this
they
is
can
all
deploy there.
that they've bought.
So it's really
stayed at
just-
the cemetery for
So it's
cemetery.
really just in the nature of clarifying that this was the most cost-effective, reasonable level of equipment for what they needed to do. The roads are a different matter. I just wanted to make sure we were confident on the numbers on the roads before we put that before you.
Well, on the equipment, the division could certainly approve a lesser number if they feel that town overcharged.
Sure.
Just like we would on.
Sure.
Approve the lower bid, and if they want to buy higher, let them.
Right. That's what I had in mind, actually. I probably didn't state it clearly enough.
I'm curious, they seem to go on to invest quite a bit in security to prevent vandalism. Has there been a history of vandalism at this?
I don't know of that, but I mean, I do know the demographics of the city of Newburgh in general, and there's quite a bit of crime, throughout the city. I think that's
Initially,
probably
they,
what-
Stereotyping, terrible.
initially they had the superintendent lived in the house at the entrance, which is no longer the case.
Right, the house, I believe, they're either preparing to subdivide the parcel and sell the house or some other purpose, but it's not currently being resided in.
So having a cemetery employee living at the entrance may have discouraged vandalism. then that's no longer going to be the case.
I mean, it's something we can get clarity on from them when that piece comes back before, but even if this particular cemetery hasn't had vandalism, there are a couple of other cemeteries right up the road that are not in our jurisdiction. There's a Catholic one and a Jewish one, and it is possible that those have had vandalism that we wouldn't know about because it's not our jurisdiction, and that's what's prompting their concern. I don't know. It's something, again, when this comes before you, we can get you more
Can
information.
find out whether it's preventative or whether there's.
The board did, on the Whispering Maples application, sign off on security equipment.
Can we find out what the difference is between security camera management and security camera equipment? 'Cause it's listed
So
as-
the equipment is the actual cameras. The management is, they've got
Service.
like a cloud-based thing so that they can monitor these cameras from the town office or, from a remote location instead of just being able to see the footage on a monitor at the cemetery.
So it's like a monthly fee?
Correct.
thing?
Says management is more expensive than the equipment.
Right.
It's like your home
I don't
security
know
alarm.
that,
The management piece, you
yeah,
think
the
is not.
management piece might not quite fit within a cleanup of an abandoned cemetery. The cameras, because, the rigs specifically mention lights and fences, so there's a security aspect to
Right.
what they're permitted to do. So I think the cameras fit. I'm not sure that the management system does.
Honestly, I tend to think you're right.
Because they can, without the monthly management system, they can view it on site.
Well, it's not even whether
Well, I
they
don't,
can.
I mean, I think in that case,
And
honestly,
they'd have to buy a monitor, which
right,
we'd
they'd
have, which we
probably
would
apply
pay for.
Yeah.
But that said, I think just strictly categorically speaking, that's more like ongoing maintenance than
Yeah.
a one-time
Right.
cleanup to bring to where it should have been.
I mean, they have cameras that like at your door, you can look at your iPhone and see who's at your door, so you can check it almost any time. We have a cemetery that has cameras in their crematory so that, the cemetery
Few of
operator
those, I think.
can periodically see the ongoing.
Hey, isn't that what you
I'm a
watch on
card
TV
carrying
when you get
ACLU
home?
guy.
Just to monitor, the work that's going on periodically. So I don't know that you need 24/7
Well, okay.
monitoring.
The one thing I suppose one thing to ask is, what are the alternatives to this particular thing?
I think my point, though, was to just, there may be particular questions about the eligibility of their non-hazardous monument
Right.
application, but bringing this down isn't really a reflection of that. It's a reflection
There's-
of our questions around sort of prioritizing projects. We will look at them, as part of the abandonment application specifically, and make decisions about approving them at a later date.
And I've added, Tony looked at it, language to this particular order that's not in the other ones, basically saying in English it says we're only approving part of this now and we'll think about the rest of it later.
Yeah, because again, I think this is something a little bit out of the routine. I'll make sure we're not making a
It's just
statement
one
for
sentence
policy.
here.
So within the monument repair section, it says you verified that 478
How much is that?
of the monuments as identified by the town present a hazard and an impediment to continued maintenance of the cemetery. Are there any that are just an impediment to the maintenance of the cemetery that
There
are
are a
not
few, and
hazardous?
those are ones that we normally wouldn't approve for an operating cemetery, ones that have fallen over and block a pathway or block a roadway. There are some of those that they do plan to remediate.
And is that a legitimate use of this funding? If
I
just
believe historically
just
it's
an
been
impediment
used for
to
that
the
purpose.
cemeteries?
I think it's a pretty good argument that if a monument's blocking a pathway or a roadway, it's dangerous.
Is that just an example, or is that?
Pardon me?
Was that just? Did you just offer that as one example, or are there certain monuments here that are just an impediment to maintenance?
No, there are
For
certain ones that
vandalism
were
funding,
falling
correct.
over, and I mean, Lewis said he's arguing that those would also be dangerous.
If they're in paths or roads.
Right.
if they-
My understanding is historically the board has approved funds.
An abandonment fund is to one-time application to return things to reasonable operating.
Correct. So if they do pose an impediment to maintenance, that was something that was eligible to to be remediated so that the maintenance could occur.
But we're just considering these hazardous monuments in this applicant right now.
Well, no, we did not exclude.
exactly.
Yeah,
no,
we
did not
break
exclude
it down as to
the small-
which monuments were.
the small
were just
subcategory of the
as
ones that are just.
Just to clarify, a town taking over abandoned cemetery can't make an application for dangerous
We're going
monument
to
funds.
correct this.
It can make an application for abandoned cemetery funds, which includes, in generic terms, a one-time cleanup. So really, the question is, does this fit within a one-time cleanup? Not, does this fit within a dangerous monument
Right,
application?
right. And we included those monuments in this application.
Correct.
Brennan-
This is all the monuments to the cemetery that they want to have.
Because the cost would become significantly higher if the contractor had to come back. But that means we're going to have to fix the proposed order, because I did not focus on this. And when I wrote this thing up, I had the word dangerous monuments in here, and it is not just dangerous monuments.
So, because we're considering a portion of it not as dangerous monuments, but as this one-time cleanup based on the town.
Right.
So, and so that's not, those differences aren't identified in the order.
Right. Well, that'd be just to get the word dangerous.
Okay.
And the other question, just to get back on the equipment, when it does come back to us, there's a requirement that if it's equipment that they could use for non-cemetery purposes, that it be, only the pro rata share be covered by the application?
All of this equipment that was purchased is stored at the
Strictly
cemetery
for
for
cemetery.
dedicated cemetery use.
The town doesn't use it for any other.
That's correct. It's just for stuff.
Okay. So are there other discussions on the Town of New Windsor abandonment application for New Windsor Cemetery in the amount of?
I would add one more item to the discussion. Most of the time when we have an abandoned cemetery, it's a non-functioning cemetery. So it's a significant liability to the taxpayers, which is why they've been added to this process. This is a cemetery that's actually operational. It's at least breaking even. Maybe it can.
The town thinks it was not making money before. The town thinks that they are convinced they can manage it better than the not-for-profit was doing before, and can actually make money on the cemetery. And in this case, I believe them.
Right. So the reason I raise that is the board has discretion to not grant the full amount, even on this portion of it that we're only putting on. And if the cemetery is making money, that might be part of the consideration.
On the other hand, the part what the cemetery, if the town of New Windsor were here arguing this piece, they would say they're only going to make money if they can get our money to fix the roads.
Right.
Oh, good point. Appreciate that, Tony.
But that piece is not in front of us.
No, none of that piece is not.
So I'll make a motion that we approve the application of the Town of New Windsor, abandonment funds for New Windsor Cemetery in the amount of $330,420 for repair of their monuments. Got a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're going to have to fix that order. Take that order.
Good order, hereby directed.
Do you want to do that
Yeah.
while we're doing Oakwood? We don't need
Yeah.
to go Oakwood.
All right.
Okay. For Oakwood, Mark Farrell is available if you think we need him.
That's up to you.
I guess it's up to you guys. If you're fine with this as it is, then we don't need him.
Let's make
Has
sure,
the
open up the
application
conversation.
changed?
The application, there were words missing from the original at the very end of page 2, top page 3. But other than that, no, it's the same deal we talked about. Is the same thing that went out with the board package. It's $500 a month, balloon payment of the balance at the end of 25 years, and after 5 years, they have to come back. And every 5 years, excuse me, thereafter, they have to come back to the board to consider whether the amount should be increased or decreased, given their ability to pay.
So do people,
I could give you a short.
Yeah, would you do that?
The short refresher is Oakwood Cemetery at one of the very first cell towers in one of our cemeteries back in 1998. The board approved their lease of land to a cell tower, conditioned on, the deal was that the first year they could use that, it was rent could be used without restriction. After that, they were supposed to split the amount, the income and the income between operational expenses and their permanent maintenance fund. And over the life of the lease, half of it, the money was supposed to go into the permanent maintenance fund. They did not do that. They used all of the money, all but $37,000 for capital improvements. That means there's about $1 million that they did not put into the permanent maintenance fund that, per the terms of their agreement with the division, should have gone into the maintenance fund. And this is their proposal for repayment. This came up initially in connection with a new application they've gotten for a construction of for a lease to a solar provider to do a solar farm in an unused portion of the cemetery. That's not before you guys yet because they are waiting to hear back from the solar farm folks on the terms of lease. And so this does not in any way, shape, or form depend on that. This is just to get them back on track to have to take the money that was taken out and regularize it after the fact. It's essentially a legally you'd call it a nunc-pro-tunc order for our recommendation on your recommendation on approval of a permanent maintenance loan. They're going to then also have to go to court because the statute requires that.
Have you withdrawn the part about the grant?
Yes, there's nothing about a grant in here. It is 100%. It's 100%. This is the same thing that we circulated last week. It's just a loan.
All right.
And it's got the 5-year look at it again provision that you guys had asked us to add.
All right, so I don't have the current draft. Do you have an extra?
So this is memorializing what should have been, the agreement as it should have been initially, correct?
This
Or to get them back to where,
this is getting them back to what they agreed with the division initially.
Yeah,
was there an order? I mean, was there?
There was a board order,
There
and,
was,
and
okay.
in order for them to not be in compliance, they had to come back to the board and also go back to the court. They did not do that.
No, not court. No
No,
court.
no, just
No
the
court. The reason we're going to court now is that this has now effectively become a permanent maintenance
okay,
loan
right.
because they took money that should have been in the permanent maintenance fund.
Right.
But not to get too technical, what the board actually ordered and what they agreed with the division were slightly different. The board's order was only that 50% of the money over the life of the loan go into the permanent maintenance fund. The agreement with the division, though, explicitly states, number one, you're supposed to split it as you go, and number two, you have to come back to the division and the board if you want to change this. And the second piece of that, the and the board piece, never happened until now.
but what got into the order was something different.
Now I've confused myself. The board's order said, the minutes from the board said, split the proceeds over the life of the loan over the life of the lease 50-50. The division and the cemetery agreed that split, one could argue that the first 50% went to operating, and then after that, all of it goes into permanent maintenance fund. But that is not what they agreed with the division. What they agreed with the division was the first year goes into operations, a 50-50 split after that, and over the life of the loan, the total would have to be 50%. So I guess a little at the end would have to have gone in as well.
Just to be clear, it's a little muddled because there was no loan approved.
Right.
It was,
Exactly.
you can have this cell tower, but you got to put half the
Right.
funds in here
Right.
and half the
Right.
funds there.
And-
Essentially, they didn't
and they-
comply. They took
right.
all the funds. That's why
Yeah.
there's a $1
Which-
million shortfall, which we're treating
And
as.
yeah, we're treating it as a loan.
As if they borrowed it.
As an unapproved loan that
Got it.
now needs approval, which requires the board's approval and Supreme Court approval, and not
Right.
pro-tunc.
And the takeaway, what's relevant, I think, for present purposes is we're pretty confident they can pay $500 a month. We do not have any confidence that they can pay more than that. But we've written into this that if they end up with a significant profit, at least 50 grand in profit at the end of the year, they'll put an extra 20 grand in.
Okay.
So
And that
in 5
deal
years, they come back and we
review.
reset.
every 5 years back by the board. It cures the problem in a sort of paper away, right? Because they didn't do it. There may have been good, fine reasons for their dilemma, but they didn't comply with the law, so we need to make sure they're in compliance with the law. It does not use any proceeds from the, it
It
does.
has nothing to do with the solar.
It is based on
Okay.
the
That
division's
was gonna be
review
my
of
next
what they,
question.
and their
Okay.
agreement about what they can pay.
What they can pay regardless of what happens with the solar.
And it is regardless of
Right.
any discussion about what happens with
Right.
the proceeds from the solar farm.
Right.
But then if the solar farm ends up getting approved and they do end up getting significant, I mean, I'm assuming there's.
That's a that's a discussion for a different day.
Because
Okay.
normally, that would be, or traditionally, in modern terms, that would be viewed as 100% going to the perpetual maintenance fund.
Right.
But anything different than that would be a policy question.
There was no documentation that they were permitted to use the funds.
Well, they weren't permitted to use the funds in the sense that the fact that my predecessor approved it wasn't permission because it had to come back to the board. I have a letter, I have some indication of the file, in the file that my predecessor said, go ahead, fine, whatever. And I have every degree of confidence that in fact he said that orally.
The only letter I've seen was a letter for the first year. I don't know that I've ever seen a letter beyond the first.
They wrote to him shortly after that and
Right,
explained what
that's
they were
very
up
different
to.
from division writing to them.
Right,
The
except,
only letter from division was, for this first year, you can have all the funds for these repairs you want to do, and that's it.
I'm not 100%, but two things. Number one is I'm not 100% sure I actually have the whole paper file. And number two, I am pretty sure this was approved. But it wasn't approved.
Insufficiently.
But it was not approved because the board had to approve it by the
Right, but
terms
they
of
were
the agreement.
represented by council, right?
Right, right.
Well, they have sort of. I mean, they have an attorney on their board who was dealing with the division.
Who was here on the cell tower application and was here when the board said 50% into PM?
And was here through extensive litigation about the crematory. So yes.
Yeah. Well, it reflects the dilemma that they face, we face, in terms of balancing out the importance of permanent maintenance fund and their general operating revenues to get through the day.
And
So,
fortunately, they do have some ability to.
no matter what, they had to
pay
come
that
back
back.
and,
Well,
they didn't.
and-
this cures that, and I think it puts the board in the right place because we're holding them to their original agreement
And also the other thing that I'll add is
on
that
favorable terms.
we have audited them. We are confident that none of this money went into anybody's pocket. And the other thing that's important is that 90% of they've dealt with most, but not all. There's still one piece left that they're going to eventually come back to us with, but they've dealt with most of their capital needs via the use of this money. And they're going to have much lower expenses in the future because they're not going to have these big capital projects on their books.
Who knows what would have happened if they'd come back and asked for permission, but they didn't, so we've got to
Right.
cure this, otherwise we're promoting lawlessness in the world. All right, so I'll make a motion to approve this petition, is that the right word? Is this, this recommendation?
So you're going to be recommending court approval, correct, Tony? That's
Yes.
all the board does.
So that's,
I would suggest that we read
We
the,
recommend, or we have no
Yeah,
objection?
we recommend.
recommend
We
that
recommend,
the
you're
court
probably going to
approve.
say no objection.
If I could just read out the terms so that it's actually in the board's order. So what I take it the board is motioning to approve is the division recommendation that the court approve non-pro-tunc a loan from the permanent maintenance fund of $1,067,826.74, repayable over a 25-year period as follows: $500 per month for 5 years, commencing July 1, 2018. An additional contribution of $20,000 at the end of each year in which revenue exceeds expenses by at least $50,000, and by July 1, 2023, and every 5 years thereafter, this cemetery shall seek guidance from the New York State Cemetery Board as to any adjustment in repayment, and that payment of the entire balance is due at the end of a 25-year period, absent further order or modification by the court.
Before you vote on it, I realize there's one clarification I need to make. They have to transfer $500 for each month. I don't believe this cemetery makes its permanent maintenance transfers monthly. I think they do it quarterly. I don't want this to be read to say that they actually have to physically transfer the money monthly when, if they're moving their permanent maintenance fund money on a quarterly basis or whatever basis they move it on, that's fine, so long as the amount equals $500 a month.
Fine with me.
Do
We should
we-
monitor that.
Do we have a copy, who
You
drafted,
don't have-
who drafts or drafted the order?
The original order?
No, the proposed, the one that's going to go before.
This language that we just talked
Yeah.
about, they are going to put it in the language you just read, I wrote, but they're going to be putting it in their petition to go to court.
So in terms of all the agreement in principle, all of the terms, their attorney, whoever's representing them, and you folks have agreed to all the terms. So we're approving an order that essentially is an order with terms in principle approved.
Subject to both Tony and
Okay.
the Charities Bureau actually seeing their petition.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I'll see the petition, and someone from your office will probably attend or submit a
Yeah.
no objection.
All right, so we have a motion. May I make that motion?
Yep. That's what Tony said. Mine was just clarification, it was
Yeah, I
just
hear you.
background. It doesn't affect the actual motion.
To make that motion?
Yes, I
Second?
make the motion.
Any further discussion on this issue? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. I think that ends our formal agenda.
We have to do some scheduling this month,
Yeah?
and
I just thought,
Friends may want to-
public, oh, what do you want to do first? You want to do scheduling or do you want to do public comment?
Dave, you got anything to say?
Oh, I have a discussion.
Dave Fleming from the?
Sure.
Yeah.
Dave Fleming from the New York State Association of Cemeteries. Appreciated the detailed conversation about the monument repairs and removals piece, which we've talked about many times. And I appreciate the board being cognizant of the fact that this is an extremely difficult process for smaller cemeteries. And larger cemeteries that do this work all the time and put in regular large applications, they have a list of vendors who are responsive. For smaller cemeteries, even ones within the capital region, it can be very difficult to find multiple people to get bids. And for the reasons that you all talked about, which is the fact that people put in consistently high bids and they get tired of being denied for those bids. The process is pretty labor intensive for them to put in these bids. They have to go in the cemetery, they look at the monuments, they provide a list. Many of them are doing photographs and, a listing of what the charges are. So it's not just 25 times, $800, and that's the deal. So it is more difficult in certain parts of the state to do this. So I appreciate the flexibility of the board and understanding that, it's just not an easy process. And also on the frost piece, the frost is different across the state. So what's acceptable to a flat granite marker on Long Island is not the same as Plattsburgh putting in a monument. So there are differences across the state. So just keeping that in mind. It's not an easy process, I think, just to create a checklist that the same techniques or a model is acceptable for the entire state. So it is challenging and difficult. I appreciate you recognizing that there are variables across the state. So thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak before the board? All right,
Scheduling.
scheduling?
So, Tony, you're kind of the wild card here for July. So why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm definitely back in the office by July 13th.
So, what does that leave us for?
Well, what are we trying to do? Weren't we trying to do the third?
We were going to do the second Wednesday or Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Second Tuesday of every month. But Tony needs time from when he gets back to actually read what's in the board package. I mean, we can try to get, when do you leave?
Well, I won't even be back the second Tuesday.
No, I know. When do you leave, though? I mean, how much of this can we get to you before vacation?
I leave in 3 weeks.
So what, the 25th?
Yep.
So we can have pieces of this for you by 2 weeks from today, but no way we're gonna have the whole thing. So we're gonna need about a 10-day lag from when Tony gets back to when we meet. So conceivably, the 24th, the 25th. I'm also trying to schedule a division-wide meeting sometime around then.
The 25th works for us.
Why?
Bridget said she couldn't do the 25th of July. Oh, no, that's this month.
Oh, Bridget's got nothing to do with anything. I mean, I think the odds of Bridget's going to Syracuse aren't all that great. I wouldn't schedule around her. I mean, I could do either the 24th or 25th as it stands right now. I don't have in front of me my spreadsheet showing which days are going to be less likely for us to have our division meeting. I know the 23rd is almost zero chance the division meeting is going to be then, so I could do that.
Any of those days are fine for me.
I seem to be okay with the 25th, although it rings hollow, but yeah.
So do we have a preference between the 23rd or the 24th?
Tuesdays, let's stick with Tuesdays.
Let's stick with the 24th then. Okay. Mike, you were okay for all the dates anyway. So now I have to confirm that there's a room available, which I can't do from my phone. But
Okay, let's say the 24th, and we'll let you know. There's a pardon me, room change
Cemetery Board, question mark. And,
at 10:30.
yep.
Okay, is there a need, Tony, for us to go into executive session?
I don't think we have anything for executive session this month.
Okay, I have nothing.
Do we? Oh, that's the order? Excellent.
That's the order.
Oh, wait, you have an executive agenda? Let me take a look at it and see whether we really need to do it. We should have a brief executive session.
Okay.
Frederick Douglass, we covered in public session. We don't need that.
I have entertain a motion that we go into executive session
Second.
for a purpose of, what do we discuss?
Legal.
Investigative and legal.
Litigation.
Right.
Broad swath, make sure it's right. Okay, let's get a second. Second. All in favor? We'll take a brief, all in favor? Yes?
Aye.
We'll take a brief interval before the executive session. I don't know, is there, come out of executive session, public?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, having moved to come out of executive session.
All right. Okay, so we're back. I moved to come out of executive session with no actions or decisions have been taken.
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Now we
Think that's the end of this meeting?
to adjourn.
Move to adjourn? All in favor? Thank you.
Okay. Congratulations.